Miguel Rhodes.
Michelle Roman Garcia.
Joyce Fletcher.
Lindsay Harris Lopez.
And next week, Dick Mylander will be our presenter. So, which has Diane very distressed because she's not going to be here.
And it's a morning graduation.
I know, I can see you're
And
very
disclaimers.
distressed. I know. So Michelle, this series is called This Is Us because we're getting to know each other and our who we all are, and some of, we say hello to each other, but we don't always know what's gone on in people's lives. So,
Incidentally, that show is going off the air soon.
right. Right.
Well, good morning, everyone. I think I do know most people in the room. I don't believe I know you, Naomi, but I know that this is being live streamed and possibly people can go back and watch it later. So I'm going to do a little bit more of a formal introduction. For those of you who do not know me, I am Michelle Roman Garcia. I've been a member of St. Mark's for about 11 years, attending first the 1 o'clock service and then moved to the 10:30 service, as I now have children who don't speak Spanish. Although sometimes we do moonlight. For Easter, we did come to the 1 o'clock. I did teach the 1 o'clock conference at 12:30 for about 5 or 6 years before I joined the vestry, and this is my last year on the vestry. I'm currently on the giving committee as well as on the parish life committee, kind of chairing that effort for St. Mark's. I have to tell you that St. Mark's has become like a second home to me, similar to the story I'm about to tell you about my journey, my spiritual journey, and the church that I came from previously. But I wanted to prefacing with, because I'm telling my life story, I hope that some of the things are, not offensive, because I'm going to be as honest and as authentic as possible in terms of how I have come through my spiritual journey and come out of it and still kind of walking in it, because it doesn't end until it ends. But I wanted to really preface the importance of 3 themes that I feel really has embodied my spiritual journey and really speaks to who I am today. The first of which is, in terms of what has happened in my life's journey to date, divine providence. If you're not familiar with that term, it's what means under God's sovereign guidance and control, he works all things for the greater good. And this is how one comes to know their intended vocation and or ministry. My second thing, which is so prevalent and something that I live by, in life, there are no small coincidences. I don't think that things happen by chance. I think it's for a reason, and it all works for the greater good. And the relevance of God's grace in my life, and specifically with prevenient grace, justifying grace, and sanctifying grace. So those are the 3 themes that I want to kind of frame our discussion around. So my spiritual journey began, I have this in the bulletin, and I realized in going through a lot of my artifacts that I was off by a few years. So my spiritual journey actually began around age 6. I think the bulletin says age 4. My father was one of the first deacons in the Diocese of Chicago to become ordained. According to this book, the church opened up ordination to deacons in about 1972, and he was the class of 1976. And I believe he was the first bilingual group ordained in Illinois. And I remember him being gone a lot on evenings and weekends because he was studying. And I remember, and I describe it vividly in the bulletin, my experience of his ordination, which was full of pomp and circumstance. I remember laying on the floor, face down, with a white robe. I remember the smell of the incense, the copal in the room, how it just filled the room. And I was like, that stuff smells so good. And just watching my dad on the floor going, this is bizarre, but feeling this energy in the room that was so Christ-like, close to God. I can't even explain it, but I was sick, and it was so.
And you were 4.
I was, I was 6. I thought I was 4, but realizing when I went through my dad's paperwork that I was actually 6. It was 1976. And it stays with me. I still remember, which is one of the reasons I really like the Easter celebration, everything leading up to Easter and those big celebrations over, during Christmas where we have the incense, and because it just brings me back to that particular day. But that's when I was just like, this is serious stuff and it's kind of cool. And I'm interested, right? So my dad became very active, being that he was one of the first bilingual deacons, and there was only a few within our parish. So they called on him a lot, not unlike we see today with Diacono Miguel. So he was at mass or at church doing something all the time. And that was my experience growing up. And I often was with my mom, but I was like, I want to go hang out with dad because I thought that stuff was so cool. So I would sometimes just hang around the church, run around up and down the pews, just waiting for him to get done. I used to go, back and watch him, get dressed and watch we didn't have Daughters of the King because I was Roman Catholic, but we did have women that worked in that capacity, that cleaned up and everything. So I was always in and around that space. And my life was pretty normal in terms of my childhood life. I had lots of extended family, lots of cousins. My father was one of 15 siblings.
Oh, wow.
If you count his adoptive cousin, he was one of 16. But one sibling died when he was about 7. So ultimately it was just 15. All of that family, when my grandmother left Puerto Rico and moved to Illinois, she was the matriarch. My father had lost his father when his father was very young. My father was just a boy. She moved here for whatever reason and everybody followed. So when my parish was St. Sylvester's, it's on the boulevard between Logan Square and Humboldt Park. And it's right between like Armitage and Milwaukee Avenue. And it's this parish that's really huge and you can't miss it because it's like in this cul-de-sac, if you will, that when you're driving from Armitage on Sacramento to Milwaukee, you see it on the right-hand side. And it was the hub of the community. But because we were so many, I had 15 uncles and or aunts, and they all had, we're Roman Catholic. So, 3 to 6 to 8 kids, we filled up that church. So everybody knew the Romans. And my grandmother, when she started getting up in age, decided that it was time to go back. She knew that she wanted to die in her country. And she moved back. And little by little, my uncles and aunts started preparing to move back too, because wherever the matriarch was at, we followed. My mother was very interested in going back simply because she still had family in Puerto Rico. And her best friend, who was my baptismal godmother, was moving as well. My father liked Illinois and he felt that he was called to ministry here and he wanted to stay. So it was a push-pull between my mother and my father. And ultimately they did sell the house and we moved a block away from my godparents. And that was in 1979 to 1980, thereabouts. And that I transferred schools. I was hanging out with my godbrothers and godsister. And then something happened that was very tragic in our lives. That Christmas of 1980, my father got a call, and it was the day before Christmas Eve, I want to say, that his mother was very sick. She was near death, and if he wanted to see her, he needed to come. So we, got together some money somehow, and he had this emergency flight out to Puerto Rico. And on Christmas Day, we got a phone call. And I remember I answered the phone. I talked to my dad, and he asked me to can you pass the phone to your mother? At which point he proceeded to tell her that she had passed. Now I'm a 10-year-old kid. She gets off the phone and says, I'm gonna say it in Spanish and I'll repeat it in English. We're not celebrating Christmas today because your grandmother died. And estamos de luto. I don't know how we're grieving. We're grieving. I was like, what? I got presents waiting for me at my cousin's house and at my godparents' house. I was not having it. I didn't know. And I didn't know what death meant. I mean, I kind of knew, but I didn't know, So I was very upset. and really upset with my mom and was harboring a grudge. And she was like, "You're being very disrespectful and you're supposed to be grieving," and, you know, throwing my tantrum. That evening she went to bed and I stayed up watching Channel 11. I had, if you remember the 80s, people used to have those big boom boxes and people used to record. I grabbed my boom box, I put a cassette tape in it, and I pressed it up against the TV set, and I was recording the Nutcracker Suite. And some classical music that was being played. I had a 5th grade teacher who used to play classical music during art. So I went to bed late, needless to say. You know, when TV went off, because that was at the time when
Yeah.
the American flag came up. you heard the Star Spangled Banner, I think it was, and then the TV would shut down. Went to bed, and within an hour or so, my mother was sick. And she went to the bathroom and she was throwing up, and I woke up to sounds of lots of pain. And I went to the bathroom, knocked on the door. "Mama, ¿estás bien? Are you okay?" She's like, "No, call your godparents." I'm calling them. This is before we had caller ID and your recorders. So there was no answer because they were out. It was Christmas Day, and Latinos, we do Christmas big, right? We're going from house to house to house, and we're getting home very late. I finally got a hold of them, and then they came over, and my mom got progressively ill, violently throwing up, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Ay, mi cabeza, ay, my head. So then my godfather said, "We need to call an ambulance." And they called the ambulance. They came, but it was Christmas. My godfather had the scent of alcohol in his breath. They assumed something else.
Oh.
And because of our limited and broken English, I was the only one that was fluent. They thought my mom was intoxicated. They were telling her she needed to walk down the stairs on her own. They wouldn't put her on the stretcher. And I distinctly remember, and I'm 10, he kept screaming at my mom, "Ma'am!" And I'm like, she understands English and she's not deaf, but you know, it's something that happens a lot. It's very prevalent. People assume that people who don't speak English, that if you speak louder, somehow they're going to understand. So I don't know what happened between the time she got out the bathroom and my godfather was helping her walk down the stairs. Because at this point, I'm like, wait, I need to get dressed to go with my mom. So I ran to get dressed, and I'm running down the stairs, and the last image that I have of my mother is her in the stretcher. So somehow they put her on the stretcher, and the doors closing, my godfather in the ambulance with her, and my godmother standing outside the ambulance, and I'm chasing after the ambulance. And it's probably 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and my godmother's running after me. And she's like, "No, mija, they don't let children into hospitals and into ambulances. You need to come home with me." So I did. And within days, within a couple days, she got worse. They hadn't called my dad yet. And at this time, and I'm not sure how it was in Mexico, but in Puerto Rico, they wouldn't bury the person immediately. They would have 9 days of prayer. So they hadn't even had a funeral for her. My grandmother, that is. My father had to be told that his wife was now ill and was in a coma and near death. He needed to come home. So he was faced with this situation. Bury my mother, not bury my mother, come back. He had a daughter and he had a son. So he flew back, and my uncle, his brother, said, "You know, I'm going to come with you. You shouldn't be alone." So both my uncle and my father did not bury their mother. They came back, and my mother passed away on New Year's Eve, 1980. Excuse me. So I remember my dad kind of being numb, but being so strong. I never saw him cry. He was trying to be strong for his 10-year-old daughter and his 21-year-old son. And that stayed with me, the strength. It was the most surreal time, because you don't expect to lose your mother within a week, especially when she was fine. You know, when it's something like cancer or something, you have time to prepare. Children are you are talked to, but it was just so jolting. And that happened. We buried my mother. My father had these huge hospital bills. We had a home, but we didn't have, like many immigrants, medical insurance. So when that hospital bill came, it put us into poverty. My father was forced to spend all the money that we made on the sale of the home and sell all of our furniture just to pay the medical bills. So he had a hard time getting back on his feet. So I subsequently moved in with my godmother. And I wanted to share this picture of my godparents. And I'm sorry for those that are in Zoom. This is my godfather, my godmother, the day of my baptism.
Oh.
And this is my dad holding me as a deacon would on a baptismal day. And then I have some pictures. Since I don't have very many pictures of my mom, I have a few that I'm sharing with you. And this is about the age, give or take a year or so before my mother passed.
I love these pictures. My mom has a lot of pictures like this from this age, yeah, and the color, the shape. How old was your mom when she passed?
My mother was 49. So
When she died?
when she died, she was 49.
Oh.
She had me just shy of turning 40. So my parents were an unusual Latino couple, because even when they had my brother, she was 28 or whatever. He's 12 years my senior. So I was a surprise baby.
That's the best kind. That's a good kind.
So yeah, so I became a motherless daughter. And the interesting thing is how God works. And when I talk about divine providence, or when I talk about there's no small coincidences. I had this church community, St. Sylvester's, and there were all of these women in the community, including my godmother, including family members on my mother's side who lived in New York and New Jersey, who moved from Puerto Rico to New York and New Jersey, who became, in many respects, mothers to me. Surrogate mothers, but mothers. Here's another picture of my godmother. She took me on when my father couldn't, and my father was grieving, and my father was selling everything off, and we were kind of homeless. She took care of me in that interim period. And my mother's sisters flew in from New York and New Jersey. I have a picture of one of them. This is the only picture I could find of her. Next to her is her only son. My grandmother, who I barely knew because she lived in Puerto Rico on my mother's side, and my cousin Osvaldo, and my little cousin, my other aunt's kid in the middle, Dennis. So my titi Lila and my titi Angelica, who's here. And it's funny, all the pictures that I found of them all have children in them. Didn't find any of them with them standing alone, or which is very telling. There's my tita Angelica. Tita Angelica and titi Lira were like anything you need. Okay. Well, my father had to work. I was a latchkey kid. I was 10 years old. You can't leave a 10-year-old by themselves. So he was forced to send me to New Jersey and New York. So I spent my summers with my aunts in New York because I needed somebody to care for me while he worked. And they became surrogate mothers to me as well. Now, the one holding the baby, my tita Angelica, was Jehovah's Witness. That was interesting. Well, she tried to convert me. We had a lot of robust conversations about faith. And I tell you, my dad trained me really well. I was probably one of the few Catholics that knew Catholic dogma, the canon laws, all of that, because we'd go toe to toe, But I would visit the Kingdom Hall, and I would see a lot of their faith, and there were some really beautiful things and traditions that they even had, even though it was so vastly different from my experience and my faith, my spiritual walk. I was going there every summer to probably about age 18. So those 9 or 10 months that I was in Illinois, that I wasn't spending my summers in New York or New Jersey, there were other women in my life. Some of them I don't have pictures of. One of them was Sister Betty from St. Sylvester. I don't have a picture of her. She was the strictest nun ever. I did go to St. Sylvester's 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. My father, being a deacon in that church, he got a discount, who worked bingo, who did whatever he could to help pay for that Catholic tuition. But she kept me on the straight and narrow. I remember that was the era of big hair, dynasty. We wore lots of makeup, and I was trying to wear makeup at 12 and 13. My father, but I would sneak it, and I looked crazy. I look back, I'm like, what was I doing? You know, I had this, you know, and she'd be waiting outside the classroom, hand me those earrings. I had to take them off. They'd be huge earrings, and she, here's your, wipe off that lipstick. I mean, I did everything to rebel. We used to have the uniforms, and I would sew them up high so they'd be a mini skirt. And then the pants were brown, and I started going to the Gap to get them corduroy and sew them real tight and wear penny loafers and the Argyle shirts. Like, that's not the uniform. I'm like, yeah, it is yellow and brown. You know? But she was very instrumental in my life, as well as my godmother from confirmation, who is in this photo here, who became another surrogate mother to me and would give me lots of advice, would talk to me when my dad was at his wit's end about this crazy teenager who was rebelling, you know, but I didn't have a mom. So this is how you deal, right? You just kind of do all kinds of stuff to figure it out. And then one of my last, or I have 2 last mentors here. This is Sister Nancy Murray. She was the nun of my parish for probably 10 years. She is the sister to Bill Murray, the actor from the first cast of SNL. And she also kind of following the footsteps of a family. It's a long legacy of the family who are actors. She also majored in theater, and she used to do theater productions at our church to get some of the kids off the streets. And she taught me my love of theater. I became a thespian in high school because of her. A lot of the pain of being a motherless daughter, I worked through my acting, through pretending to be someone else, or just having that experience helped me to lean into those characters and to become a better actress. And in fact, that was my first love. I wanted to major in that. And my dad's like, we're poor, you need a job. Consequently, changing my major, but did minor in communication and theater. So this is her, and she's still my friend on Facebook. And we talk often about all kinds of things, including faith. So she was very instrumental. In fact, she helped me fill out my college applications after I met this woman, another mentor and surrogate mother. This is Domenico Tolino. She was my college recruiter. I met her at 15 or 16. She was in the back of my cafeteria at my high school. She was the first woman that I had ever seen that looked like me, that was a professional woman. You know, wasn't living in poverty, wasn't on Section 8, wasn't a factory worker. And I remember I kept looking at her because her hair was dark. I mean, she looked like she was Latina. And she was like, you can approach my table. I was like, okay. And then, have you thought about college? You know, what is that? And tell me about your grades. And she kept in contact with me. And she helped me in that process of figuring out what I was going to do. And I wound up going to the institution that she represented, which at the time was called Rosary College in River Forest.
Now Dominican University.
Now Dominican University, also a Catholic institution and very much aligned with my values. I did apply to UIC thinking I couldn't afford a school like that. And somebody told me, you're going to college and you haven't visited? I'm like, is that important? And they're like, yeah. So I went to visit and said, oh my gosh, this is huge. It's very impersonal. Impersonal, is that the right word? Just, the classes were 300-400. And I said, yeah, this is not for me. So
It's not a pretty campus.
Especially
Rosary's a
then.
pretty campus.
at least now they've done some construction. Yeah, Rosary has a quad. It's very quaint.
And greenery.
It has a chapel,
Right. They have grass, they have trees. UIC is kind of.
Yeah, and incidentally, that picture was taken at Rosary in the social hall for a presentation for Hispanic Heritage Month. And that's probably in my late 30s. So another surrogate mother. So these women were all very instrumental. And notice how I'm dressed. We're dressed very similarly. When I started college, I didn't dress like this. When I started college, I was homesick. I stood out because most of the girls were Italian, suburban Italian girls wearing khakis, and I dressed very urban. I dressed whatever the people were wearing in the city, and it didn't look like what they wore. And people treated me differently as a consequence. Plus, they weren't very used to seeing Latino people on campus. I was one of 10 Latino students, and they let it be known. There was a lot of prejudice. I remember when I would find somebody that was Latino, I would gravitate to them, as you would, and start talking Spanish. And I remember one time coming back from the cafeteria, and I turned the corner into my dorm room, and somebody yelled out, "We're in America now, speak English." I'm like, I speak English. Expletive. And I remember leaving one day out of my dorm room to go to class, and somebody put a Mexican sombrero in front of my door. And I kind of tripped over it. And I'm Puerto Rican, so I'm like, if you're gonna insult me, get it right, So there was a lot of that. And Dominica, who was one of the first Latinas at the school, she was only maybe 3 or 4 years older than I, was like, you're gonna be okay. Don't drop out. Don't be discouraged. You are first, and you are a trailblazer, and you're gonna make it easier for the next generation of Latinas that are coming through. We need more so that it's not unusual and people get used to us. So she was very instrumental in my early life. And then I met someone, I fell in love. He was of Filipino descent, and very much like Latinos, very family oriented. He was dying to have a family, and I was just coming into my own. I had a degree, and I was like, am I ready to get married? I want to travel. I want to do this. I kept putting him off until finally he got tired of waiting, and he wound up choosing someone who was ready for marriage and wanted to start a family. And that started my descent into my separation from my spiritualness. I stopped going to church. That broke me. That was another a sense of abandonment, similar to what I experienced as a child. And it kind of brought me back to that place that I hadn't dealt with really completely. So I just started kind of dating just to date. And here's where my story gets really real. That I'm gonna share something that maybe some of you might not be prepared for. But I wound up getting pregnant out of wedlock. And I had a father who was a reverend deacon, who people thought he was a priest because he was so active in the church. And I was like, he will never forgive me. And how is that going to look? And what are people going to think? And the shame of all that, I made a decision that I have come to regret. And it's kind of weird that I'm bringing this up because what's happening now on a national scale. Just to be very clear, I am pro-life, but I made a choice then that was very against those values for fear of what would happen to my dad, the way the community would see him. And I remember going into that room bawling, and the nurse is like, if you don't want this, why are you here? Just so callous. I'm Catholic. As I went under and I woke up, I was dismayed, and I had a friend who met me there, drove me home, and I had such regret and such shame
Oh.
And here's a moment of no small coincidences and divine providence. I come home, she's like, do you need anything? You might make you some soup. I turn on the TV set. And I see my dad. I think it was 5:30 news, 4 o'clock news, something. And he is holding a sign, and it looks like he's picketing. And it was anti-abortion, pro-life.
Oh.
Now, my father was not the kind that would be marching downtown. He was not the kind that you get a bus together, let's go to Washington. It is the only time that I know of in my lifetime that he was doing that. And I was aghast. And I knew at that very moment that God was sending me a message. Which is why I'm even more strongly pro-life, because I fell to my knees at that moment and I sobbed and I cried and I asked God for forgiveness. And my girlfriend was like, are you okay? And I said, when I get well, I need to go confess. I still had the shame though. I wasn't going to go to my parish. I drove all the way to West Chicago, St. Mary's. And the priest was like, who are you? And I proceeded to tell him. And he said, well, that's a big one. We talked. What was striking to me, though, was the first church that I went to where it wasn't this little box.
Mhm.
And he's, and I'm it was a room like this. And I was in a chair like that. And I'm like, wow, my church doesn't do it like this. And we had a conversation. And I walked out of there knowing that I was reconciled to God. And I knew that God had forgiven me. But, those things stay with me. And what's happening right now is very triggering, because I'm seeing the debate. People like, where do you stand on this? I'm like, it's a hard place to be, but I know that happened for a reason. And it brought me to where I am today in my spiritual walk. So this happened in my late 20s. About 2 years after that, I met my first husband, and I dated him for a long time, probably about 4 to 5 years. I'm like, what's going on? I'm now 35. And his family was like, she's a great girl, kind of pushed him to pop the question. And I kind of knew that he had reservations. I looking back, I know that I willed that relationship to be. Dated him, the marriage didn't work. Within 3 months of marrying, he had left. In fact, we were separated 4 times in a year and a half. The 4th time, I told him, this is not a revolving door. This is a marriage. If you want to come back, we need to go to counseling. He did 2 or 3 times and stopped going. So I knew that I needed to move on. That marriage ended, and I just didn't want anything to do with anyone. And I just kind of went inward and just really got involved in my church. And then my current husband, who some of you know, Rafael Garcia, re-entered my life. And I say re-entered my life. I met him when I was 5. He is my baptismal godparents' nephew. So I met him when I was 5, and he came from Puerto Rico, and he was about 11. He got married young at 18, and we found ourselves reconnecting because my god sister moved from Puerto Rico to Illinois and moved in with me. And we bought some furniture, and it was a Darwin furniture, and they were charging like $200 to bring it because we lived so far. We lived out here. And she's like, my cousin has a truck. He'll bring it. Well, he brought it and then never left. He was coming over and visiting. And then one day she was going to bed, and she's like, I'm like, what are you doing? Your cousin's here. He's like, he's not here for me. I was like, oh no, I'm divorced. And my marriage wasn't annulled. But he pursued me. And I just gave him a run for his money. And my aunt, Tita Angelica, I got a call that she was now sick with brain cancer. So she fell ill, and I flew to New Jersey to help care for her, and she consequently died. He called, said, when are you coming back? I don't know. He wanted to buy me a plane ticket. I said, let me know how much I owe you so I can pay you back, because I don't want you to think that I owe you anything. The day I flew back, he was calling me. It was my birthday, and it happened to be Ash Wednesday that day. And he's like, a little bird told me it's your birthday. I said, and he's like, let me take you to eat. And I said, well, I'm fasting. And he's like, you have to eat. I said, listen, I gotta go. Mass starts at 7. Where do you go to church? Christ the King in Lombard. That's where I'll be. I pull up to church. He's standing in front of the church with flowers.
Oh.
That was our first date. We've been together ever since.
Oh.
I was 38, 39. So I wanted to have a family. My husband no longer could have a family because he chose to stop having children and had an operation. So now we're at this crossroads, and I'm approaching 40. And I'm Catholic. All my friends were doing in vitro, but it's something that you really have to think about if you're Roman Catholic, because it's not something that is accepted, right? Namely because you have to make a lot of babies, hope some of them take, and then the rest either leave them on ice or they get rid of them. So that was a hard time for me. What do I do in this process? And then my husband's daughter got into a bit of a problem. She had a spouse who passed, and she didn't handle it well and fell into addiction. And her kids went into foster care. She was so embarrassed. And she was living with shame. She didn't tell anybody. We had to stumble across this, and then we had to fight to try to get the kids out of foster care and with us. And he asked me, what should we do? And I was like, whoa. I was in my own journey. We're going to adopt, and we were in this process. And I prayed. And I remember going to the basement that day, turning on David Muir. I forget the name of the show, but sitting there watching, and there was a little America Strong. It was about a family that adopted an African-American little girl through foster care. And I was like, I just prayed. And I'm like, I'm on the elliptical going, this is bizarre. And then a commercial came on. I'm like, God, are you trying to tell me something? And the commercial came on about foster care. I was like, got it. So I came to my husband and I said, I think this is what we need to do. He's like, are you sure? They're 3. And I said, beyond the shadow of a doubt, I know that's what we need to do. So the kids came to live with us. And it's been an interesting journey because they're children with trauma. And it was a lot. And I remember I had joined EFM. Are you guys familiar with EFM? And I was in my 2nd year, and I joined EFM because I knew that God had something for me to do. I knew that I came from this legacy of, a father, and I have a cousin who's a priest and an aunt who's a nun, and that I'm supposed to do something, but I didn't know what that was. And in the middle of BFM, because every year they ask you, what do you think your ministry? And everybody was finding what that was. For David Thornblazer, it was Shelter for Life. For Sarah, it's possibly the priesthood. For me, I'm like, I don't know. And I came to realize in taking care of the children, that all the things that have happened to me regarding the fact that, my choice not to have a child originally, what that did to me, being a motherless daughter, the fact that I had so many of these surrogate moms in my life, all of that was preparing me for this divine providence of what I was supposed to be doing, which is caring for these children and preparing me. And it's funny, he's my husband, they're my husband's biological grandkids, and he doesn't have the patience that I have. But God was preparing me. There was something I wanted to share, and I don't mean to make this political, but I saw it on TV the other day. It was Pritzker, and he was doing one of his commercials. And I don't know if you've seen it. It's about him talking about his mother and his mother's journey through alcoholism and what that did in him. And he said, when I was 7 years old, my dad passed away, and my mom lost her job, lost her life, her life partner, and she was afflicted with a disease called alcoholism. She struggled valiantly to take care of her kids. She lost her battle, but ultimately won because all 3 of her children survived. When you watch someone struggle, you develop a kind of empathy, and you understand that it becomes your responsibility to step in. I've tried to do that during my life wherever I could. She needed help. We needed help. And when I have the ability to do it, I should do it. And that commercial just resonates with me. And I remember people in the EFM saying, are the kids still with you? What's going on? God, you're doing is a great thing. What you're doing is just, I'm like, what? Really? You know, they'd be like, not everybody would do that. I'm like, really? Like, because I just thought it was something that you just, when you get the call, you just do. But watching that commercial, I realized that everything happens for a reason. There are no small coincidences. That these things that happen to us to prepare us to be there for someone or something. And that really kind of is where I'm at in my spiritual journey. I know that this is my current mission. I don't know what my mission will be once the kids are grown. And they have brought so much challenge into my life, but so much joy, because I am also evolving and developing and emerging in my walk, in my spiritual walk. So that kind of concludes my talk. I don't know if there's any questions or.
I got lots of questions. First of all, when did you leave Christ the King and come over here?
I missed that part.
Yeah.
And it's in the, it is in the bulletin.
Okay.
I left Christ the King because my husband, when he met me, he was in a hurry. He was like, his first marriage, he wound up getting someone pregnant, and he married because he had to. And he said he never met someone like me. He said, and I quote, "You're the first woman who ever said no to me."
Oh.
You're the first woman that I had to really work hard for. And he says, and I know that God brought you in my life for a reason. He wanted to get married in church. He was married through City Hall,
Okay.
you know, very, very quiet, not a lot of people. And I said, I can't, you know. And when I started the process to annul my marriage, I went to a retreat at the Archdiocese of Joliet for divorcees, and they were like, it's gonna take 18 months. And he didn't want to wait the 18 months. So I tried to schedule a meeting with my parish, and they're like, yeah, no, you gotta first do this. He tried with his priest at his church in Arlington Heights. The guy wouldn't take an appointment with me either. And then he went to see him anyway. And within 2 days of that meeting, we're sitting watching TV, and his priest comes across the news for pedophilia. My husband just gets up, runs to the bathroom, and throws up. I'm like, are you okay? And he proceeded to tell me, that's my guy. So we were both really disillusioned. And we came across St. Mark's one day shopping for a church. We had visited a church, a Methodist church, downtown Wheaton, just didn't feel right. We were taking Bible study at Lutheran church in downtown Lombard. That was, the Bible study was great, but we went to service. The priest had his back to us, or the pastor. And I was like, this is like pre-Vatican Council. This is weird. And that didn't sit well with me. So I happened to be going to downtown. I forget what the reason was, but I saw the Virgin of Guadalupe sign that was out. And I told my husband to stop. He thought we were about to run over a squirrel. And he's like, what? I'm like, look. I'm like, in downtown Glen Ellen? So we went in, and Father Victor was here. And I kind of stood in the back, and I said, can we talk to you just for 5 minutes? And he gave us a whole hour. Within 2 weeks, I was reading at the Easter Vigil. I was teaching Sunday school within like 4 months. And
Wow.
And one day he asked me, why aren't you taking communion? And I was like,
I'm Catholic.
and I'm divorced. And he's like, and I'm like, you know, I'm not allowed to. Well, why? I'm like, because I'm a sinner, you know. And he's like, we're all sinners. And he said, let me ask you something. He said, when Christ was sitting at the Last Supper, did he know that Judas was going to betray him? I said, yes. He said, he knew that Peter was going to deny him 3 times. Yes. Did he say, you two are not worthy? I was like, okay, uncle. I have been taking communion ever since, and that guilt is not there. And so I mentioned in the bulletin that I still consider myself a Roman Catholic, big C, because I still have a lot of that in me that I'm working through my fellowship with my friends at St. Mark's. But I have Episcopalian heart, and I think the empathy that I've built over my life because of the things that I've been through, and that lesson that Father Victor gave me, such a very simple lesson. I try not to be judgmental. So all the stuff that's happening right now on both sides of the spectrum when it comes to the abortion issue, I have empathy because I know both sides. And I try not to judge others, even my stepdaughter. You know, my husband right now deals with a lot of resentment, and he doesn't understand. And that's okay. You know, she's going to be okay. We have to keep praying for her. And that's kind of where.
How is she doing now?
She seems good, but addiction is a lifelong battle.
Are these kids like teenagers?
So one is 16, one is 14, and one is 11.
Oh, boy.
We've had them for 4 years.
That's a hard time. Oh, mercy.
You've seen them here, right? You've seen the show.
The boys, and they'll be acolyting at the 10:30. So they acolyte quite a bit. And Ariana, she did her confirmation. The children have been confirmed. They did their first communion. Well, no, Rashawn still has to, and the baby still has to do his confirmation, but they all been baptized. And they love St. Mark's. They see this as their community. And I remember when we first opened our doors after COVID, Rashawn ran through the middle of the aisle and he screamed, I love St. Mark's. I'm sorry for embarrassing Rashawn. Because he has found a family here. So he doesn't have very many family members in Illinois, but St. Mark's has become that extension of the family, similar to the experience that I had growing up. And again, no small coincidence, divine providence. I need to.
Can I ask another dumb question, maybe?
Yeah.
When you were at Dominican, I don't see how people would think you were some foreign person. I just don't see that.
I know. I'm like, I was thinking the same thing. Your name is Michelle Roman, and they're mostly Italian, and Italian
just-
coloring
They
is.
would make me, sometimes they would call me
Italian-
Romano. They're like, no, it's Roman.
And
But I
Italian
spoke
coloring
Spanish a
is
lot.
very
Well, the way I
similar.
dressed when I first started college, I clearly was an urban kid.
Okay.
I wore the urban garb, the
Okay.
way I even wore my makeup, but meeting Dominica, I remember one time she was leaving to go to a recruitment fair or something, or college fair. And I saw how she was dressed and I looked down and I'm like, I need a new wardrobe. I didn't have a mom to teach me
Right.
these things.
Yeah.
And even if she did, we lived a certain way. And the community I came from, we dressed a certain way.
But you don't look. I don't
Now,
understand that.
This is
Why
called
people get
assimilation.
caught.
I very much looked the part then.
Okay, the other part. of it.
And I spoke a lot of Spanish or Spanglish.
Maybe it was speaking in Spanish,
Yeah.
but it just seems to me that people are judged initially by your appearance, and that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it was, this was 80s. I think things evolved over time, but my class and the people in my generation, because the civil rights movement happened in the 60s, a lot of that legislation came to pass later where schools started to integrate more and more. She was the first bilingual, bicultural recruiter the school has that was assigned to inner city schools. Before that, Rosary College wasn't sending anybody to Chicago public schools or to recruit. I wanted to leave you guys too, I forgot to mention this, the relevance of grace in life, the prevenient grace, God's active presence in our lives before even sensing the divine at work in our lives. I didn't know all this stuff was gonna lead me to this path, and that God was aligning all of these heartbreaks for the greater good. Justifying grace through which all sins are forgiven by God, and sanctifying grace, which allows people to grow in the ability to live like Jesus. I don't think I would have that empathy if I didn't go through those things. I don't think I would have taken on 3 children that were not my own when I clearly had other options. And I wanted children. One. God had different plans. But I know that this was all part of the plan.
It's a wonderful story.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wonder if it's the people from the screen or from the Zoom had some questions. Caroline, Angeles, yes. If anyone has a question? okay.
Hi. Hi, Kim. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Agnes.
Hola, Angeles.
Hola, Miss.
Uh-huh.
I love you, Miss.
I love you too.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It was really wonderful to hear your story.
I have a few more pictures too.
Sure.
This is just a certificate from my dad. In 1981, he got a parish community like certificate for social services. And we were like in the depths of poverty. And my dad would be working in the food pantry and working the rummage sale. And we're like, that was such a lesson, to see that we were poor and we were still giving. I have a picture of the priest of my parish at the time, St. Sylvester's, Sister Nancy, and my dad, and he's wearing La Virgen de Guadalupe
Okay.
shirt. And the Virgen was not something that I really gravitated to as a youngster, but in this journey, the Virgin has become very prevalent in my life. Incidentally, my dad is buried in Queen of Heaven. It just kind of happened because we had to find a place that was in the Diocese of Chicago, and that was the closest that still fell to the Diocese of Chicago in order for the Catholic Church to like pay for his funeral. So I'm like, no small coincidence there. And then my dad, when he passed, he had this like on his person. He used to carry this with him everywhere. And it's the Virgin of Guadalupe, which is not even the Puerto Rican Virgin, which is why I have such an affinity. Because every Latin American country has their own version of the Virgin.
This is interesting. Many people from Puerto Rico, the Lady Guadalupe dressed in color blue, and in Mexico we color green. But for some reason, I was in a Humboldt Park church too, and I with a Puerto Rican community, and they didn't tell me exactly why this different color, but I perceived the color difference. You they have it too,
Yeah, well,
but they love to.
she's all in there.
Yes.
There's a bunch of stuff in there.
Yes. That's interesting. Yeah.
And this is a picture of my dad at St. Mark's on my wedding day.
That's wonderful.
And this is my mom as a young woman. Again, I see a lot of pictures of my mother with children. And if anybody's interested, I do have this booklet, Decade of Deacons. And I tabbed a prayer,
Beautiful.
as well as I tabbed his graduating class from St. Sylvester's.
And I still remember your dad, Michelle, and he felt confident in so much.
He did, he was
He
comfortable.
have a conversation with us and people here,
Yeah.
he was confident to, I think he enjoys to be here.
Yeah.
Even we don't know where we are, but it was a good sign.
And this is his patron saint, and in Queen of Heaven, he's buried right in front of St. Francis de Assisi. And it was a new area. There was hardly anyone.
Okay. It's 10:02, and I think it's time to,
Yeah,
Say
we have
goodbye
to
to
say
people
goodbye to
from
the
Zoom.
Zoom people.
and
Bye.
we're going to stay in here now for the continue sharing some questions. But thank you.